Hello, I'm Tara Brabazon and welcome to the Post 81. The many faces of the part-time PhD. Oh, this is a good topic, and it comes via request from one of our fantastic members of our online community. I'll leave the post anonymous just in case, but the request of all of us was to explore the part-time PhD because she's about to start that mode of enrolment and wants to know the strengths, the challenges, the problems. So she's going into this situation knowing what could occur. So my absolute pleasure to do so. Really good question. Now you might remember way back in the dusts of time, I did an original vlog on the part-time PhD in the first series. Very simple vlog that was to what is a part-time PhD. Thanks for playing. But I was aware even at the time that the PhD, particularly the part-time PhD, was changing and was becoming much more complex and intricate and interesting. So sociologically, the higher degree program has changed radically in this decade, and the part-time PhD has also transformed. So let's get into this and let's set the scene here. The PhD right now, in fact, the doctoral space is a space of diversity. There are, say, 5 PhDs, the traditional PhD, the prof doc, the professional doctorate, the professional that exists, for example, in public health, that exists in education. We also have the artifact and exegetical thesis that exists through all disciplines now, which is tremendous. We have the PhD by publication, boo hiss, and we have the PhD by prior publication, yay. And the age of the students in our programs is also changing radically. It's lifting in age radically. So we have students in their 20s, straight out of their undergraduate degree, honours, if you're in Australia, Aotearoa, New Zealand and the United Kingdom, or a 4-year degree with a capstone program for many of the other areas around the world. So we've got that group. But now we have, in fact, where most of the students are, is in their 30s, 40s and 50s, but we also have a very sizable group of students, hello team, in their 60s, 70s, and yes, students in their 80s and 90s. Fantastic. Now we've got those students, and of course they've been out of formal learning for some time, which renders the professional development program incredibly significant as they enter higher education once more. Theses are completed now for reasons far beyond becoming an academic. So, in the old days, even 15 years ago, someone would do a PhD with the expectation that they would become an academic and they would work in a university. Right now, the figure of students that do a PhD and then stay to enter the higher education workforce, that's between about 40 and 45% of all doctoral students. Now, people that don't know what they're talking about read that as a problem. Oh no, so all these PhD students are being trained and there's no jobs for them in universities. The students that are enrolling in doctoral programs right now don't want to work in universities. They already have a career. And remember, theses are completed now as part of ongoing professional development for very senior, experienced and brilliant people in their 30s, 40s, 50s and 60s. And particularly in health, allied health, in education, but also we see it increasingly in social work. We've got wonderful professionals who are doing a doctorate not to work in a university, but as part of their professional development arc in their career. And so what they're doing is they're completing a lifetime of work, a lifetime of experiences. And that's why the PPP, the PhD by prior publication, is increasing in numbers, because we've got incredibly experienced, well-read, well-researched, well-written people who have produced a lot of publications who are returning to higher education. And we also see an interesting group that is returning to get their doctorate because they're moving into the consultancy space. We also, and I personally love these students, they're my favourite students to supervise, if I'm honest. I didn't say that, yeah, I probably did. The students that return to do something that is a passion project. So they're doing a PhD. It's often called, sadly, a lifestyle doctorate. It's not that, but people, after working hard through a life and a career, decide they're going to do a doctorate in something that means a lot to them. So as you can see, to separate out the doctorate into part-time and full-time modes is an incredible simplification of what's going on right now. These are exciting times for doctoral degrees on this planet. Exciting, changeable, volatile. So let's get into it. Today, therefore, I want to focus completely on the new part-time PhD, looking at the new research. As you'll see in my reference list, it's qual and quant. We've got a lot of longitudinal case studies, and I've intentionally been as international as I can in this research. So we're going to start with this different part-time PhD, particularly composed of a different sociological group of students. And those differences, this diversity, presents fantastic new strengths and also things we need to monitor and watch. And at the end of this vlog, I'm going to present some very quick strategies for you if you're about to enroll in a part-time PhD, or you might be stuck in the middle, that will provide some strategies to just clear your head and ensure you're set up for success. That's the goal of today. So there are 3 types of part-time enrolment in a PhD. So when we say part-time PhD, there's actually 3 types of part-time. The first is the group of students that are enrolled in a part-time PhD from the start of their candidature right to the end of their candidature. They are part-time PhD students. They start part-time, they finish part-time. And we see those students particularly in health and in education, and often the prof doc is in this mode, and these remarkable human beings are fitting a part-time PhD often around full-time work and or full-time caring responsibilities. So we see this particularly with teachers, with nurses, with midwives. Hi to all the midwives out there. And we also see this with social workers as well. Most prof docs are part-time enrolments. So students are doing a course a semester, and then they do a part-time dissertation. So this group of students are fabulous, are successful, are stable, they've got strong backward mapping, they're scaffolded through the coursework, good, solid completions. Great. One type of part-time PhD. Let's do the second type of part-time PhD. This occurs when a student is enrolled in a PhD in a part-time capacity through almost all of the candidature, and then they switch to full-time right near the end. These students are often in full-time work, but then something happens. So they get long service leave. They get a bit of extended holiday leave. They get a scholarship or funding from their workplace in some form. They may get made redundant with severance, or they get what some universities construct as a completion scholarship. So particularly for part-time crew that want to do a final push, and a lot of the best universities have a completion scholarship for that group, so they get 2, 3, 4, 5 months funding and they finish. And can I say, if you're looking for bang for your buck, for all my colleagues around the world, if you're looking for bang for your buck for your scholarship money, completion scholarships for this group, absolutely winning, absolutely winning. And these great students make a decision. Okay, this has occurred. I am now going to use this time and I'm going to move from part-time to full-time enrolment. Now, these students are magnificent. It's been my great pleasure to work with a lot of them. They are highly motivated. They're so motivated, they're frightening. And they have a timeline and they have a deadline to completion, and they appreciate the support because they'd never really had the opportunity in their lives to focus on a doctorate full time. So when they do, they grab it by the throat and they love it. This is an amazing group of people. I love working with them. Brilliant. Okay, so there are two types of part-time student, but I said there is a third. And let's talk about the third type of part-time PhD student. This is the frightening one. These students start full-time, often on a scholarship, often our youngest students, but they take a long time. Something goes wrong personally, something goes wrong professionally, procrastination perhaps emerges with multiple causes, and all of a sudden the scholarship runs out and they're not finished, or perhaps they're nowhere near finished. And at this point, when the scholarship has run out, they move to a part-time enrolment and they're desperate for any work they can get to pay their bills. Now in Australia, this has been studied and it has a very clear historical period. So for these students, they get to 3.5 years and this mess occurs. So they've been 3.5 years full-time, then the scholarship stops and it's a shambles. They move to part-time and all sorts of problems emerge in this final, let's hope, 6 months. Now what we see is mental health concerns spike from students that have never had mental health concerns before. Personal relationships break down. Relationships, marriages break down because of the incredible stress at this time. And often we see supervisory relationships break down at this point between 3.5 years and 4 years, because the supervisor throws the student under the bus. They just can't get the student finished, or the student throws the supervisor under the bus and says, I blame you for the state of my candidature. Can I say both are wrong? But we're suddenly then in a culture of blame and shame and guilt, and the students just can't sort of move their task and time orientation from a full-time mode to a part-time mode, which involves, of course, fitting those final really difficult stages of a doctorate into and around what may be part-time or full-time work. We need to remember that, we've got students who are part-time all the way through. And they're fantastic students. They got no problems. They're backward mapping. They reach their milestones. Part-time all the way through, not a problem at all. But it appears that the snap between full-time mode to part-time mode creates a really, really terrible situation. And I just need to also log a bit of a sidebar in this final version of the part-time doctorate. Can I say that was also my story? It's a very minor issue, but let's recognise it. And they're the students that start full-time and then they get a big full-time job while they're enrolled in a PhD. And they have to finish the PhD part-time, but incredibly quickly. So this group needs specific and bespoke care and specific strategies to help them get through in a really, really difficult situation. So just remember these 3 different groups as we move now to provide that assistance about what the part-time PhD support structure, the caring infrastructure, looks like. Let's get into the second half, and I want to therefore log the specificity of the part-time PhD, but also recognise the work we've already done today and log these 3 very different modes of enrolment. I also wanted to mention a book that was published in 2024, written by John Rainford and Kay Guecci. And it's a good book, Thriving in Part-Time Doctoral Study, published in 2024. So I did make sure I read it carefully, read it all the way through. It is a solid book, but what was the surprise perhaps, 2024 publishing, is there is a lack of attention to the post-pandemic research. The doctorate will never return to be what it was pre-pandemic. There is a, I'll use the cliche, new normal. It also doesn't deal with, this book doesn't deal with the radical ripping of the fabric of what's occurring in higher education with redundancies at the moment and the impact of that on supervision. It's also very, very focused on the professional doctorate, with people who are integrating a doctorate into their professional practice. Now, as we talked about, they're often part-time students all the way through. They know what they're doing. They're experienced, rock and roll. So that's a more stable way of doing a part-time PhD. But there are other part-time PhDs that are currently being undertaken. But the book is available for you for Routledge. I've referenced it at the end, so please feel free to have a look at that. But what I'm doing today is dealing with the really, really new and edgy and controversial research that makes us all feel a little bit uncomfortable, so that you know what you're going into. If you're about to go into a part-time PhD, I am going to present to you what the research is saying about your future if you choose to accept it. Okay, let's do it. 1. The part-time PhD is riskier than the full-time PhD. Risk is interesting. I've been sort of living in risk registers in the last 3 months or so. So risk is something that is important that we understand, acknowledge and log. We need to know that moving into a part-time PhD is riskier, and know right from the start that there are protocols that we can implement that can make this whole process easier and mitigate that risk. Firstly, rule 1, you must touch your thesis every single day. It doesn't matter if you're finding a reference, it doesn't matter if you're changing a font, getting a heading organised, don't care. Touch the thesis every day. Stay connected with your thesis every day. Create 7 small tasks to complete every week, and then complete those tasks. Create a timeline for your entire thesis with an end date, and with a lot of care, backwardly map from that end date. Now, these 2 strategies, touch the thesis every day and backward map from a completion date, those 2 strategies will get your part-time PhD candidature home. Great. 1. Let's throw ourselves into the next strategy, which is, here we go, your supervisory team may not go the distance. So you need to choose wisely. International higher education at the moment is unbelievably unstable. Now, you've seen all sorts of adjectives applied to universities, toxic or zombie, and that's just my research. But 20 years ago, academics would work for a long time in one institution, right? And can I say that also has some problems as well, but they would have tenure and they would be stable. Well, look, tenure's gone, stability's gone, every single academic is one day away from being sacked. That's our world. So for a full-time student, having a supervisory team go the distance is increasingly unlikely. Always, even 10 years ago, 40% of students would change supervisors on the way through. Now that figure's just exploded. But you see, for part-time students, you will have a change in your supervisory panel. Therefore, I would argue now every single member of your team is pivotal. I would ensure that you not only have a great principal supervisor, but you need to spend a lot of time, a lot of time considering a co-supervisor, because the chances are that human will have to take over your candidature and supervision at some point. And look, probably, and it's amazing I'm saying this because I don't agree with it, but you need to do this. Probably even consider a 3rd supervisor, and if your 3rd supervisor is an adjunct and actually working in another university, that might also be useful. What we're increasingly seeing now are students in the latter stages of their candidature transferring universities. So spend time picking every single member of your team, noting that one of them will have to take over. Okay, think team, don't think single supervisor, and also try, if you can, to ensure that your supervisors are experienced with part-time enrolment. This is a very, very different way of doing a doctorate, as we're talking about today. And can I say, only in the last 2 years did my couple of hundred completions click over into the part-time students dominating over the full-time students. So the world is really changing. But I see my part-time students every single week. I read their work every single week. In some ways, I supervise them the same as my full-time students. And I make sure they're part of a wider doctoral community, and they are supervised with as much attention and care as my full-time students. Now, if a supervisor starts to park your needs or slow things down because you are a part-time student, then perhaps it is time to pick another supervisor. 3, pick a university, pick a doctoral program with a proper and expansive online professional development suite. Oh yeah. This point is crucial, and crucial for many reasons. So many universities have no understanding, they haven't done their own internal research, no understanding about how the international doctoral cohort is changing sociologically and also in terms of mode. And when I say sociologically, this is a very, very complicated group now. We've got a great diversity of ages from the early 20s right the way through to the 90s. We've got gender, we've got the rainbow community, noting that all sorts of really complicated bullying scenarios, gaslighting scenarios are occurring for that particular community, which has got to be addressed. We've got incredible impairment and disability matters that we need to address. Great human beings are entering our doctoral program that require a series of disability action plans. That's important. And we've also got race, indigeneity, First Nations, First Peoples. All great, but a very diverse cohort. So we've now got this sort of bizarre situation where, noting all of this diversity, that universities in their professional development program are assuming that all these different students can be in a room at 10 a.m. on a Tuesday morning for a professional development seminar. This is madness, absolute madness. Therefore, you need to investigate professional development programs. You're looking for a university with online professional development programs, full stop, but you're also looking for a university that records those sessions so that you've got asynchronous viewing and listening opportunities later on. If the universities that you are considering have not got information about their online professional development program, you need to send emails to find out what's going on. This will be of help to you. So colleagues, just to give you a clear example about why this matters so much, say you get up very early in the morning, or you're working late at night to do your thesis part-time, or you're working on the weekends, which is very, very common, and you need to see a session on, say, how to do a literature review. If there's a seminar on a Tuesday morning at 10 a.m, that's not helping you. But if there is a session that exists in an online portal that you can plug in and play into your life, that will speed up your thesis. It'll change your thesis. So that's important. But I also want you to check what's going on with your institutional library. I need to make sure that your library is geared for all sorts of doctoral enrolments and all sorts of doctoral students. I need to make sure you've got access to materials where you are. Also, make sure that the expertise of librarians is able to work with all sorts of platforms in your time zone and for your timeline. 4, do not do a systematic review. Oh yeah, this one's going to get me really, really, really in trouble, but you know what? I don't care. I'm getting sick of it. Now, systematic reviews have an almost evangelical commitment, particularly in allied health. You go to allied health, systematic review, systematic review, systematic review, and so you can't even question it. Now, as a protocol, if you want to do a systematic review, knock yourself out, not bothered. My critique of systematic reviews is not important at this time. But where it is important is we need to get real. We need to get real about a systematic review in a part-time PhD. Remember, the point of a PhD is to confirm a SOC, a significant original contribution to knowledge. Now, if you take 6 years, let's work this out, let's get real. Say you take 6 years to do a PhD. or 7 or 8, and you've done systematic reviews in the first year of your 8-year candidature, you tell me, do you think you've got the current research in that field? There are lots of ways that you can mend systematic reviews, by the way, one of which is an iterative literature review. Big fan of that. So if it is a bit of a mess, you can put in an iterative literature review and sort of solve the problem in some form. But why do you need to solve the problem in some form? If there's any chance that you will have a long candidature, any chance that you will be a part-time student at some point, then do a literature review, not a systematic review. Now, you know, I'm not a huge supporter of literature reviews. I find most of them incredibly boring and pretty dreadful most of the time. So, you know, it's not like, oh, literature review, Lou, yeah. I'm not that person. But you see, a literature review at its best is flexible. You need a way to present the current state of research at the point that you're submitting, not at the point that you started, right? At the point that you submit, you have to confirm the gap in knowledge. You have to confirm the SOC. And if you've done these tightly constituted systematic reviews, and then there are years before you submit, you have not confirmed the gap in knowledge at the point of examination. So do a literature review because it's flexible. You can add research to it. Now, I know supervisors are committed to systematic reviews. It's an evangelical commitment. It's a bit frightening, really. And the reason that supervisors are committed to systematic reviews is because they get a lot out of them. They get authorship on systematic reviews, and at the moment they attract a fair number of citations because we live in pretty dumbed down times. I hate using that phrase, but we live to, oh yes, well, I'll just reference a systematic review. I mean, it's pretty basic knowledge in a systematic review, and then I'll reference the basic knowledge in a systematic review. Living the dream. But that doesn't help you. Producing a systematic review as an article that gets some citations, that's not helping you in your thesis. Your part-time candidature requires that you confirm a gap in knowledge and you confirm a SOC. So for part-time students, do a literature review and that will confirm the gap. 5, speaking of SOC, monitor your SOC. Monitor the publications that emerge in your field through the candidature. Now, the challenge with a long candidature is you may be gazumped. You may start your enrolment, you've done your literature review, you've got your gap, fantastic, living the dream. But knowledge changes, and thousands of refereed articles are published every single day. Therefore, you've got to keep current with the literature. So the best way I do this is I get my students to go into Google Scholar and put a series of automated feeds to themselves. So pick 5 or 10 key concepts or tropes, and any article that mentions those concepts or tropes, they receive it. Similarly, who are the 10 most important scholars in your field? Everything they publish is sent to you. Very important. Keep up with the reading of this new material. Add this new material in a really careful weekly way to your literature review. And that means you're going to be able to tighten the SOC. Love a good tight SOC. But you've got to be able to tighten the SOC and demonstrate for examiners at the end that your research is still current. 6, monitor mental health. The research is now really clear. I've been monitoring it now for 10 years. It commenced with the Belgian study before the pandemic. The longer the student is enrolled, the more likely they are to gain a mental health issue. Now, I'm not telling you this to frighten you. I'm actually doing this to give you the information so you can make determinations and choices. Now, there was a really poor study, I had such hopes for it too, there was a really poor study that was published in Australia last year that didn't really offer any generalisable or rigorous data sets at all, what happened was they had questions about what happens, what is the relationship between a PhD program and the development of a mental health concern. Great research question. The problem was they got the students to self-select, and so students with mental health concerns before they entered a program then talked about what happened to them during the PhD. Now, that's fine. That's an interesting research project too, but the problem was that wasn't what the research question was about. They were trying to explore a student that hasn't had a mental health concern and what's the impact of a PhD on that. Okay, so students without mental health concerns enter a program and they're cool, they're fine, for about 3.5 years. This is what the data set is now showing. So students enter the program and they're cool for about 3.5 years. They're focused, they've got it all going on. Then between 3.5 and 4 years, mental health concerns spike. It's an unbelievable spike. And of course, once that occurs, a series of cascading issues follow on from that. Therefore, we need in a part-time enrolment to note these international studies. So right at the start, enroll in wellness and mental health programs, all sorts of support you can gain. And what I need you to do is have task orientation and time orientation and backward mapping. So you've got a sense always about where you are in the PhD and you're focused on the ending. And please, take care of yourself. 7, speaking of taking care of yourself, noting isolation and loneliness. For most PhD students, the isolation is really tough. Again, it does depend on your mode of enrolment. Prof docs like the Doctor of Education, Doctor of Public Health, lovely cohorts and communities are formed through the coursework that then tend to continue through the dissertation. But as we talked about earlier, if there's any chance that at any point you will enroll in a part-time mode, select a university that's organised for asynchronous digital delivery. There is a way that I want you to organise and care for yourself and care for your professional development. So what we require is a university that not only delivers PD via digital synchronous and asynchronous means, but also support systems, social events that are delivered in that way as well. So seek out a university that understands that a PhD is about intellectual connections, but also social connections. And the other thing I would say to all my extraordinary part-time students out there is be aware that the students that you start with will finish before you. So all the way through your program, discover new friends, new colleagues, and new relationships, and that will get you home. 8, understand and manage attrition. You've got to go into the part-time PhD with one maxim in mind. The longer you are enrolled, the less likely you are to finish. Part-time students attrit more than full-time students. Now, I'm not saying this to move you away from part-time enrolment. I'm not. But you need to understand and apply and think through the data set. Know that there are a diversity of humans and experiences in a part-time enrolment, and be aware that attrition is more common in this mode, and there are many reasons for that. The most significant is that the PhD is difficult, and it is difficult on your friends and on your family. And look, let's be honest, it's difficult to do anything in life for a long time. So finish as quickly as you can. Whenever you think, I'll stay in bed for an extra hour, don't. Get up, work on the thesis. Backward map, have a plan, have a support structure. You can do this, but please remember, the longer you are enrolled, the less likely you are to finish. 9, recognise the burden on your partner, your family, and your friends. No one does the PhD on their own. No, you sort of involve all your friends and the family in the suffering as well. And wow, some of the yuckiest moments I've had as a supervisor, let alone as a dean, but as a supervisor, have involved family members, frequently partners, contacting me and having a say. So at the start of your candidature, sit with your family and establish parameters and guidelines and trajectories so that you work on the thesis, but then you've also got time to spend with them. Remember, your partner is going to take a lot of your slack for years. So keep them with you and keep them walking with you. But also construct an endpoint. You can't have the people that you love in your life sacrificing indefinitely. You just can't do that. Give them a deadline so that their sacrifice can end, and know that if you keep extending this doctorate, you could lose a lot more than time. And 10, here it is. Know and respect the professional staff in graduate centres. Around the world, graduate offices are staffed by remarkable professional colleagues. These people provide administrative support, but also the frame around you and your candidature. Learn their names, learn their functions. With all the mess that exists in supervision, you may find that it is the professional staff that are the difference between you wallowing in a garbage bag of dreadful supervision and actually finishing this thesis. Spend time looking at the structure of the graduate office at your university and contact the staff and say hello, say hi, and say you're a part-time student so that they recognise your name. That's important. These are incredibly important and skilled people. They can help you. And know that this is so important to me because I wouldn't have finished my own PhD, certainly in a timely fashion, without the professional staff in a graduate office. You see, as most of you remember, I was enrolled in a PhD while in a full-time academic job, my first full-time academic job, in a different country. And I was in a difficult situation. I had a rubbish supervisor, absolutely incompetent human being, right? Rubbish. Didn't read it, nightmare, wouldn't sign off to allow me to submit my thesis. That's how serious it was. And of course, I needed the thesis submitted so I could get my next job. Now, as a young person, you can imagine the stress that I'm under here, right? I was in a different country. I was desperate. And remember, this is before Zoom, this is before Teams. There weren't many emails that were being sent. And I couldn't afford endless calls because I had no money. So I wrote to the graduate office in a different country, and the remarkable woman who ran it, Anne Randell, and the woman who ran our candidatures, the wonderful Karen Akalski, changed my life. I still know them, by the way. I'm still a great friend of Karen on Facebook. Love you, Karen. You're a legendary human being. And Karen and Anne got that thesis organised. They got that thesis sent out to examiners, and it was returned with 3 1s, passed without correction. I could get my new job. Brilliant. Fantastic. So by that point, I then moved to another state compared to this particular university where I'd done my PhD, and the thesis by the regs had to be bound so I could get the transcripts. So, of course, I was in a different state. So my parents, who had never been to university, arrived at the graduate office to sort of try and help me and work out how to get this thesis bound and what has to happen with the library and so forth. So they'd sort of arrived going, hi. Karen looked after them, got it all organised, walked around the university with them. Fantastic. Neither of them had been to university, and they were dealing with a staff member in a graduate office. And right through their 90s, both my parents remember Karen, remember that day, and have great fondness towards her as the outstanding human that she is. So remember, please, there are talented and skilled professional staff. They will help you. So very early on, seek them out, know their names, know what they can do for you. Okay, so what we need to do, colleagues, is we need to talk a lot more about the part-time PhD in its diversity. There is no single PhD. There, in fact, is no single part-time PhD. Let's respect that diversity, but let's also understand it and let's support it. I wish you love, light, and peace. Tea out.